One of them was the sale of the state power plants. There's about $600 million in state power plants around the state. In and of itself, one could argue that you could sell them, but there's many questions about how the state is assured that in the long term you don't end up paying more for the power by leasing it, by buying the power, than if you owned it yourself. So there's a lot of legitimate questions. But there may be some people in this room that don't realize that the governor would have the authority to sell that $600 million without a bid. Now, if you think that my leaving the state of Wisconsin frightened you, imagine giving the power to an elected official to sell $600 million of assets to his best friend. Now, skip a couple of days and think about that telephone call, that prank telephone call that was supposedly coming from David Koch, who is one of the richest men in America, who wanted his government back so badly he decided to buy it. And he is supposedly on this conversation. You know one of the things his business does? They buy power plants. They have set up an operation in Wisconsin. They've opened an office with 4 or 5 people. And their Americans for Prosperity have been spreading mistruths about legislative records in the past election, and they will continue to spread those mistruths. He doesn't live in Wisconsin. He doesn't care about Wisconsin. He doesn't know where Spooner, Wisconsin is. Yet he's going to use his almighty dollar to do everything he can to profit at the expense of Wisconsin. And you have a governor who is having a conversation with him at the same time that this governor, by the way, would not go across the street and speak with Superior Days delegates who are part of the citizens lobby that goes to Madison each and every year. So that's number one. And people should be really frightened that somehow bids are the heart of transparency. You don't do highway projects to the person who contributes the most to your campaign. You do it in the best interest of the taxpayers. And you do it in an open and transparent way so that every business can have the opportunity to get that work. And you hope it's local work that gets the local workers get the jobs. So that's number one. Number two, there isn't a person in this room who believes that any of us are above the law. You have a responsibility to abide by the law, whether you like the laws or not. Now in the legislature, we have an obligation to change the law by introducing and passage of laws when we have laws that we either don't like or want to improve. We want to eliminate. In this bill, the Secretary of Health Services is giving the authority to ignore the law and cut thousands of people from medical assistance services. Now think about that. The legislature takes an oath of office, swears to uphold the Constitution, and our duty, stated in the Constitution, the legislature makes the laws, is deferring our responsibility to an individual who's only lived in the state of Wisconsin for 2.5 months, came from Washington, D.C., has never been to Spooner, Wisconsin, but now has the opportunity to take medical assistance services away from our most vulnerable citizens. Let's say it's an elderly in the nursing home who needs dental care. Our law says, and it's an option, our law says that dental care has to be provided for adults. He has the authority to begin to deny those services without regard to the law. So for those who have concerns about what we did, you should even be more frightened that we have an administration that's going to act as though they are above the law. Excuse me a minute. That provision alone has created incredible anxiety in thousands of citizens across this state who depend upon those services. I've talked to many who are currently undergoing cancer treatment, and they're worried not so much about getting better. They're not using their energy about getting better. They're worried about whether or not they're going to be economically protected in the effort to get better. And I, for the life of me, don't know why we want to put vulnerable citizens in that position. None of you would do that to your family members, and your government shouldn't do it to you either. If the legislature wants to change the law to remove people from services, have the courage to do so. So what's the situation when the Secretary announces these in the near future, or whenever, July, August, September? What's the consequences? You will see legislators saying, I can't do anything about it. It's the administration's fault. I'll send them a letter. In the meantime, poor people suffer. Sick people get sicker. That isn't Wisconsin. And that isn't right. It isn't the Wisconsin way. So we had a proposal that was being sold under one pretext, but was really about eliminating workers, attacking workers' rights and eliminating unions. There's something fundamental in this country about our rights. I tell you that the hearings produced thousands of testimony, and one was most compelling from the Archbishop of Milwaukee. The Archbishop of Milwaukee said it best. He said, it isn't an economic issue in protecting workers in the workplace. It is a moral imperative that we protect workers in the workplace. And he quoted the Pope. Some of you may have gotten a letter from me in which I used the same quote. I wasn't quoting the Pope. I was quoting the Archbishop of Milwaukee, who was quoting the Pope, because he was saying it as clearly as could be, that workers deserve to be protected in the workplace. Workers' rights are essential to a democratic society. A worker's dignity, the dignity of the workplace, the worker's dignity deserves to be protected as much and as often and as long as possible. That is the heart of a democratic society. Now think for a minute, think for a minute who these workers are. When you dial 911, how many of you are thinking you're talking to a union member? How many of you are wondering what the person's benefits are? Or are you thinking you want that person to send the police or the fire or the emergency rescue team to provide assistance to the person in need? How many of you who go to parent-teacher conferences look at the teacher across the way and say, I see a union member? Or do you see a teacher who's the caretaker of your child, the promise of our future, the well-being of our community, the person you entrust with the responsibility to nurture the goodness and promise of those children? How many of you go to the nursing home here in Spooner and see those CNAs or the nurses or the home health care nurses in this community and see them as union members? You see them as caretakers, people who provide quality of care and opportunity. How many of you, when the snow flies after the snowstorm, see that snowplow driver as a union member? You don't. You see them as members of your community who are providing a service, a return for your dollars, in a way in which you're able to travel more safely, you're able to do more, and our society is stronger and better for it. Those workers are the face of the community. They are the quality of life of our community. They are the volunteers, like many of you. I've been going to the Spooner Rodeo Parade for 25 years. And I can tell you that many of those volunteers who help organize that parade and participate in that rodeo, faces of this community, are teachers, public employees, who give their best to make sure that this community can have the best, because they love it here. And they don't deserve to be considered public enemy number one. And they don't deserve to be chastised because of the profession or the dedication to the life that they chose.